Grahame, the Olympics do obviously consume us. We watch it, I know certainly I do. Many Australians watch it all the time during this fortnight. We love the gold medals and it affects the politics a bit, I guess. Yesterday we saw the tax policy from Labor. I don't think it was a coincidence that they announced it right in the middle of golden time for the Australian athletes.
Yeah, I agree. There's no doubt that's why Labor announced it then. And you know, Mr Albanese, he came in 96. So when John Howard first got elected, he's been there all that time, was Deputy Prime Minister, and now it's sort of official that, you know, he believes in nothing. You know, vote Labor next time just because. You know, if fancy throwing out a policy like this, it just... I understand why, it's politically expedient, but quite odd. But yeah, a climate... You know, if there are elections were held soon and we won a heap of gold, it quite affects the vote. It's why governments hate rainy, grumpy, wet days on polling day, because people walk into the polling booth and they're not feeling very happy about anything. Everyone wants a nice, happy... Government's like a nice, happy day.
Yeah, well, the Prime Minister might want an election off the back of the Olympics and all the gold medals, Bruce, but I think it'd be a nightmare for him at the moment if an election were held this Saturday.
Yeah, it's not going to happen this Saturday or this year, Kieran. They've got a long way to go. I think it'll be held in March, or I think as latest as May in 2022. So I think it was a good move by Labor to make those announcements. I don't think that they'll be looking to do it quietly. I'd be shouting it from the rooftops, actually. It clearly didn't go down well with the electorate. It didn't go down with the electorate for some very good reasons. And it was probably the reason why we don't have a shortened Labor government right now.
So, can I just say something about the Olympics? Two of my girls were state swimmers and one nearly went to Rio to swim. And all of these big events, incidentally, she's not a client of ours, all of these big events are sponsored by Gina Reinhardt, all these big swimming events. You know, without her, we're not going to get all these gold medals. Nobody actually says thank you to the sponsors. And for decades, she has provided the finance that helps deliver all those gold medals for us, and nobody ever says thank you.
Tell you what, I was impressed with the father of Ariane Titmus. He ended up being, he's a television journalist for Channel 7, so I was thinking, geez, he's quite articulate, this father, and he ends up being a journalist. But Bruce, let's talk about the broader issue of COVID and the response. I think you and I have discussed it with Grahame in recent weeks. There has been a real shift in the politics of this once-in-a-century pandemic, and it's not working great for the incumbent federally.
It's working very poorly for the Prime Minister because he can be blamed for not getting the rollout done in time, for saying that it wasn't a race when in fact it was a race, for not controlling the quarantine arrangements effectively. So they're all things that go straight to his responsibilities. The state governments, on the other hand, have been very careful and tough in trying to keep borders locked, going into lockdown when they need to, and basically being seen to be the ones who are protecting the Australian people or the people of their state. And that's why these governments are getting elected and re-elected with huge majorities, because of the work they've been doing. He can't rely on that right now. That's his problem. And here in New South Wales, you know, we're going into a very, very difficult period with this lockdown. It's only going to get worse in the coming weeks. It hit a new high today. And now there's a real call for JobKeeper to be extended to New South Wales. The opposition leader here, Chris Minns, has just come out today and called for it. I think it's important that this happens because people in New South Wales, workers and businesses, are really feeling it. And we need something that's more substantive than these emergency measures that have been put in place. We need, that's fine for a month or so, but we really need JobKeeper when we're looking at a lockdown that's probably going to go for 1 or 2 months yet.
Grahame, certainly from a business perspective, ACOS had a similar view that the supports need to be increased. And this is in New South Wales, which is, you know, if we look at it in political terms, it was meant to be the strong the strong suit for Scott Morrison. He was meant to maybe pick up a couple of seats at the election in New South Wales. That's looking a lot less likely now.
Well, that's why election is not held now. And yes, it will test the communication skills of the government, but we're still a long way away from the election. And I still think, you know, providing we're not digging mass graves all over the country, by the time we get to the election, people will say, well, it was a bit rough. I seem to remember I didn't like it back in, 6 months ago, but by the look of it, the government has got us there, and we look pretty good compared to the rest of the world. Now, that is the message the government has to sell. If they can't sell that, they could be in trouble.
Yeah, I agree. If that comparison, which while we're in the teeth of the storm, so to speak, with this lockdown, it's very hard to imagine that. But a few months down the track, and when we're near, hopefully we get to that 80% vaccinated mark,
yeah,
then it becomes a bit more history in the minds of voters.
Well, we've got South Australia about to open up a bit, Victoria about to open up a bit. We've got a long way to go in New South Wales, and people are starting to get a bit frightened. But that too will pass, we hope.
That's right. It all has to go really well now for this government. Before it was just sauntering down the highway to an election win. Now it's going down a very narrow path. Saw today, that there's problems with the rollout of the Novavax vaccine, which is the other one that they're bringing in to replace AstraZeneca. That's a real one, I think, for the Liberal government, because if they fail on that one, then people are going to be saying, my God, what can they do? And that's the problem right now, because Labor only has to say, well, you said there was no race. Well, there is a race, buddy, and looks like you're losing it. And the people of Australia are suffering as a result. That's the sort of thing that Labor's able to say and will say in this election campaign. And it could be very devastating for Morrison.